This is Breakpoint This Week, a weekly briefing on faith, culture, worldview, and mission with John Stonestreet, president of the Colson Center for Christian Worldview.
Ideas have consequences, bad ideas have victims. Welcome to Breakpoint This Week. I'm John Stonestreet here along with Warren Smith, talking about the stories that are happening in our culture from a Christian. Warren, I want to start today with a very interesting kind of back and forth between two Supreme Court justices. This is unusual on a number of levels. First of all, it's not unusual that Supreme Court justices disagree. It is a little bit unusual when it happens, kind of outside the court itself. And also, one of the things that Justice Clarence Thomas is known for is not saying a whole lot. But this week he made an argument, and it was actually carried later on in First Things, just basically uncovering the eugenics history of abortion. And Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg wasn't happy about that.
No, she wasn't. And specifically, Clarence Thomas referred to a pregnant woman as the mother of the child that she's carrying. And that was what seemed to particularly set off Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which, of course, it highlights just how important the use of language is and how crazy things can get whenever you start using words in unconventional and other ways that they're not intended to be used.
Well, I love what Robbie George put on his Facebook post. Of course, Robbie George is a professor of Princeton University, co-author of the Manhattan Declaration, past winner of the Wilberforce Award. But he made the argument that if a woman is who's carrying a child and seeking an abortion is not a mother, then a woman who is carrying a child and not seeking an abortion also is not a mother. I mean, it can't be in any sort of biological reality sense that choice to carry a child or not to carry a child, or to terminate a pregnancy or not, to have an abortion or not, changes the fact that one is, at least biologically speaking, a mom. And, my thought was, after reading Robbie's Facebook post, that, well, if a woman seeking an abortion is not a mother, then a woman not seeking an abortion, also pregnant, can't really be called a mother. And you tell a first-time mom that, right? I mean, we all, I have enough friends and watched my wife go through the first time of pregnancy. She's pretty convinced that she was a mom the moment she got the positive test results back.
Yeah, exactly right. And, and of course, what about the father as well? That's one of the things that Robbie George points out. What if the man doesn't want to be a father, but the woman wants to bring the child to term and give birth? If birth would suddenly make him a father, should or shouldn't he have as much right as the woman in order to order an abortion? No, or why not? And so, again, just all kinds of logical cul-de-sacs that you end up in whenever you don't sort of accept basic biological realities.
Well, the logical cul-de-sacs beyond just even the story. I mean, it was kind of the same day that I saw this response by Professor George dealing with this story that, also saw a headline story having to do with a transgender biological woman who identifies as a male, goes in for stomach cramps. And basically, as it turned out, this biological woman who identifies and presents as a man was pregnant. And the story was so odd because basically here you have a woman dressing like, acting like, even taking certain medications that have stopped her cycle, but still claiming to be a man, presenting as a man, going in claiming for stomach pains. And the article was basically saying, look, well, because there's this stereotype that only women can be pregnant, this is a man that's pregnant. And basically what ended up happening is the child died during childbirth and the woman was pregnant without knowing. And because she presented as a man, basically there was a stereotype, implied that the doctors didn't do their jobs. But this has to do, even fooling around with this idea that Justice Ginsburg did, that a pregnant woman seeking an abortion is somehow not a mom, and then this headline which said that this man had a baby. Look, playing fast and loose with language has been, I think, part and parcel of the sexual revolution from the very beginning. And I think when you blur the distinctions between male and female, that's one thing, but that inevitably leads to blurring the distinction between gender-related roles like mom and dad, even some that are biologically grounded like mom and dad. And at this point, then if we don't adjust to this new reality in medicine, look, there's some medications that are gender specific. They work for women and don't work for men. In other words, nature doesn't go along with our, ideological fantasies. What I'm saying is this is just out of hand.
Yeah, it really is. As a friend of mine used to say, I wish we could all fly, but gravity always wins, as you might say. And, John, it's also interesting. You started off this program by saying ideas have consequences and bad ideas have victims. In every one of the cases that we've talked about so far, and it's not always the case, but certainly in these cases it has been, a child has been the victim. And it's almost always the case that whenever bad ideas start having sway in the culture, it is the most vulnerable, the defenseless, that are the first victims. And you would think that in a just society, in a just culture, those should be the folks that we should be looking out for rather than creating circumstances in which they are the first victims of the bad ideas.
Well, children have been the victims of the sexual revolution in particular since the very beginning. And it does come from playing kind of fast and loose with facts and words, kids need happy parents, not married parents, and kind of this fundamental separation of marriage and parenting. And then, kids don't need moms and dads. Kids need loving parents, or love makes a family. Or, in this case, a woman who doesn't want a child is not a mother, even though she is biologically a mother. And then a man can have a child. And because, forgive doctors for not thinking that, here you have an actual victim who lost their lives. And playing fast and loose with this language, this is what we mean when we say ideas have consequences and bad ideas have victims. And, in so many cases, the victims are, other girls, trying to win a state track meet that are the victims of bad ideas. And that's bad enough. Losing a scholarship, losing something that they worked hard for. But now we have a child actually losing their life on these ideological fantasies. And that, to me, is a whole nother level of what we mean when we say ideas have consequences and bad ideas have victims. Well, you're listening to Breakpoint This Week. I'm John Stonestreet here along with Warren Smith. Come to breakpoint.org. Click on the link on the homepage. It says resources mentioned on the radio and podcast. And while you're there, sign up. Speaking of the sexual revolution, sign up for our latest short course, which begins this coming Tuesday, called The Gods of Our Age. We're going to talk about 4 gods, idols that we worship in Western culture. And I often joke, because I used to be Baptist, they all start with the same letter. So the 4 gods of the age that we'll be talking about in this next short course is stuff, state, sex, and science. In each and every way, these inherently good things are being elevated to the place of God, and the consequences are significant. Again, it's our latest short course, begins this Tuesday, goes for the next several Tuesdays in a row. And if you miss a week because you're not able to attend this live online session, then we will send you a recording of it so you won't miss any of the content. Again, that's at breakpoint.org. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
We invite you to visit Breakpoint.org. While you're at our website, be sure to browse our online Colson Center store of great books and other resources. And you can link up to our social media sites like Facebook and Twitter.
Back on Breakpoint This Week. Warren, I'm in Illinois this weekend. In fact, as we record this on Thursday evening, I just finished a session with the Illinois Homeschool Convention on entertainment. And I often point to a book. It's a book that I know you have relied on a lot, just incredible insights on the power of entertainment to rethink the way we see the world in not good ways. Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death. I often tell people, look, the introduction to that book is all you need to know to wean yourself off of an addiction to entertainment. I mean, it's just one of the most stunning pieces of writing, particularly social analysis, that I've ever seen.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. He compares in that introduction Aldous Huxley's Brave New World to George Orwell's 1984. And George Orwell, of course, had a vision of a totalitarian future that what we hate would come to dominate us. And whereas Aldous Huxley said what we love would come to dominate us, the things that seduce us would come to control our lives. And he says in that introduction that Aldous Huxley's, that for many years we thought that George Orwell's vision was the vision that was basically going to come to pass. That was the prophetic vision, because we had totalitarian regimes all throughout the 20th century. But now a lot of these totalitarian regimes have fallen, and we have the entertainment culture, which is distracting us and keeping us from doing the things that give life meaning, and we see a very different vision. I didn't mean to go too far off into that, because I know, John, you wanted to make a point about a particular example of that this week.
Well, yeah, it came to mind immediately. And, the great thing about Postman's book is that he wrote it in 1985, the year after 1984 didn't really come true. And if you are kind of thinking, well, Big Brother kind of happened, well, it did, but I think we'd argue that it only happened because we were entertained to death. An over-entertained generation is an easily captive one. I think that's the point that needs to be made. And here's what I thought about this. So there's deadly tornadoes throughout the Midwest over the last couple of weeks. I mean, devastation. In Dayton, Ohio, for example, they actually had to use snowplows to remove the debris from the highway. It was just so devastating. And I think over 200 tornadoes touched down in the Midwest was the last number that I saw. I'm actually recording this from the Midwest, so I'm looking out the window in great fear as I'm doing this. But there was a remarkable scene, and this video was shared widely, of a Fox 45 meteorologist, Jamie Simpson, who basically was doing his job. He came on with a special breaking weather news report talking about the potential danger, telling people to take cover, telling people about how serious this was. And almost immediately, he started to get heat on social media. And the reason is because they had preempted The Bachelorette in order to warn people to protect their own lives. And it's this remarkable video where the guy kind of learns of the backlash that he's getting on social media for getting in the way of The Bachelorette. And he just kind of loses it. I mean, he just kind of says, I'm done with you people. You've got to be kidding me. Of course I'm going to warn you. We're going to do the right thing here. And he later apologized. I don't think he had anything to apologize for.
No, I don't either. It was a little bit humorous and a little bit awkward and embarrassing, I guess, in some ways. And maybe he was apologizing for losing his temper. I don't know, but I completely agree with you. I don't think he had any reason to be embarrassed or ashamed for what he said, which basically was that human beings matter, that saving lives really does matter. And, I actually also thought in some ways, John, we talk a lot about vocation here at the Colson Center. And I thought, you know what? Here's a guy that takes his job seriously. Here's a guy that thinks his job matters. And God bless him for that.
Oh, yeah, I thought the same thing. In fact, I made the joke with the crowd today is you could just hear like weathermen across America stand up and salute when he goes on his rant. Like, weathermen of the world unite and fight the idiocy. There's got to be a level of, just incredible frustration. I mean, these guys are literally taking seriously their job to help keep people safe. And it's a real job, and there's a real warning to go out and just the self-centeredness. But you kind of look at the people who fall off cliffs playing Pokemon Go, or, trying to take selfies at the Grand Canyon, and the number of people that have actually perished this year at the Grand Canyon because of that. And you think Postman had he was so right, and yet he had no idea. There's people like Neil Postman and T.S. Eliot and C.S. Lewis, and I think they warned us of things, and God really spared them for not letting them see kind of the full level of consequence of the things that they warned us about. I mean, I kind of feel like if you drop T.S. Eliot, in the middle of Times Square right now, his head would just explode and it would all be over, because he just couldn't handle how right he was about, distraction and things like that. And Postman, I think, as well. I mean, he wrote this book about television, right? I mean, he talked about us being entertained to death at a time when there were still rabbit ears on televisions. I just kind of think, what would he think today when he knew that we had one of these things strapped to our hips at all time that was always interrupting us, always getting in the way of face-to-face conversation, and even just completely skewing our value system like we saw here with this tornado. Well, listen, come to breakpoint.org, click on the link on the homepage. We'll link you to this video, but we'll also link you to where you can read this remarkable introduction to the book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, which dates back to 1985, written by Neil Postman. Warren, I want to talk about something else. I think that even as we have seen so much good news, at least proof that the Supreme Court hasn't settled the issue of abortion like has been said for 4 decades now, and even as we see many states kind of double down on abortion rights on one hand, and many states loosen or basically try to overturn abortion restrictions, even to the point of fetal heartbeat bills, and certainly Alabama's near kind of universal ban on abortion. There's another threat to human dignity that has been marching. We've been talking about it at least since 2016, when this issue marched through Colorado, and I was stunned by how much public support there was for so-called death with dignity, or doctor-assisted death. And it looks like all signs are pointing that the state of Maine will be the next state having just passed both the Senate and the House just this past week, a Death with Dignity bill.
Yeah, it's called, ironically, a Death with Dignity bill. And as you said, it passed the House pretty narrowly. 72 to 68 was the vote on Tuesday for that. And John, my recollection is that this is the seventh state to do so. So it is I don't want to say a growing trend, because 7 is not anywhere near a majority, but it's 7 too many, certainly. And, I think that, again, it just highlights that how important activism at the state level is. Very few of us have the ability to influence things in places like Washington, D.C. or New York, or the entertainment culture and entertainment industry in Los Angeles. But lots of us have the ability to influence what happens in our cities and our counties, on school boards, and at the state level. And we're seeing, as this new bill in Maine points out, a whole lot of activity at the state level.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, another part of this lesson that we need to learn is that this bill failed in 2017, so just 2 years ago. The bill failed in the House. That means elections have consequences, elections matter, and also just sticking with it mattered. Look, Colorado, proponents of that bill saw it fail in front of the legislature and then turned the tables and set it out to kind of a referendum. And there is a relentless amount of money and amount of activism on the other side. And I think you could kind of look at Christians in particular and social conservatives and say, we've got that sort of kind of gut, we've got that sort of activism, that sort of organization when it comes to abortion. I'm not sure we can say it at all when it comes to doctor-assisted suicide. And, this is a grave threat when it comes particularly to those with disability. And it's, as we said, the right to die devolves quickly in the duty to die. And then you have family pressures, you have the challenge on the conscience of doctors and the freedom that they have to say no. You have the very, very fuzzy lines. This is basically when someone's given 6 months to live. Well, that's not something that doctors know with any sort of certainty in almost any situation. And, of course, the idea of pain and suffering, that what is unbearable for one person is not for another. And what we've seen in Colorado is when you kind of give, we tell students in particular, Colorado has one of the highest teen suicide rates in the nation, number 2 last year, I think. And I think that at least part of it is we want to tell students suicide's not the answer. There are other answers. Well, we just passed a bill that said it is the answer in the case of extreme suffering. And why is it extreme suffering only physical? Why can't it be mental? And suddenly in a state where we have high levels of PTSD, high levels of mental illness, high levels of meaninglessness and so on, then suddenly what you've done is put an idea in teenagers' head. So to say that these two are unrelated, there's just all kinds. This is what we mean. Ideas have consequences. The bad ideas have victims. You're listening to Breakpoint This Week. I'm John Stonestreet here along with Warren Smith. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
You can learn more about Breakpoint and the Colson Center for Christian Worldview when you visit breakpoint.org. That's breakpoint.org.
Well, back on Breakpoint This Week, John Stonestreet here along with Warren Smith. We're going to wade into some awkward waters, but it's a really important topic. We talked about it this week on Breakpoint, and there's kind of this zombie idea. We call zombie ideas. That we use that term to refer to ideas that should have died a long time ago. And one of those is that Christians have kind of historically suppressed fun, particularly in the area of male-female relationships and sexuality. And this goes all the way back to the myth that's long been around that, those pagans were having such fun and the Christians came with their prudish morality, all the way up to the Puritans, who certainly never enjoyed anything, much less, physical relationships. And, it just kind of goes on and on and on and on. And the converse part of this myth is this false promise that the less religious you are and the less bound you are by kind of traditional moral structures, particularly in that area, confining those sorts of relationships to marital relationships and so on. And this part of the myth is repeated not only, in words, but certainly it's embodied in popular culture, in songs and movies and television shows. So if you would say, okay, of married people, cohabiting people, and single people, who enjoy the most amounts of kind of sexual encounters and which ones are enjoyable the most. You'd look at it and go, well, single people, if all your information came from televisions and movies and from these historical myths, that's certainly kind of traditional morality tied to Christianity. Well, that certainly is not going to be, that which brings you kind of a level of satisfaction. Well, the thing is, that idea needs to die. I mean, it's long overdue. Not only is the picture of the Puritans and the prudishness of Christians throughout history historically inaccurate, but study after study, including a brand new study by the Institute for Family Studies at Brigham Young University, reveals that it's married people, and especially religious married people, that just kind of consistently rank the highest when it comes to physical satisfaction. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. Our friend Brad Wilcox was one of the co-authors of that study. And John, one of the things that impressed me about that study was just how much data they had, that they looked at different surveys from 11 different countries, Argentina, Australia, Chile, Canada. I won't name them all, but the United States was, of course, included in that. And they looked at about 5,000 couples surveyed by the Global Family and Gender Survey. And they found that religious married people had the greatest level of satisfaction when it came to sexual relations. It's who to thunk it, right?
Well, it certainly makes you ask the question, why? I mean, why is it that married people, especially married religious people that have all these kind of moral boundaries around? Well, I think part of it has to do with there's just a fundamentally bad definition of freedom that's been embraced in our culture. That freedom and boundaries are irreconcilable. But I've got kids, they're most free within boundaries. They're not most free without boundaries. When they know how far they can go and what they can do within it, then they're not tiptoeing around the world. And I think the same thing, is true. It's also interesting, as we said on Breakpoint this week, is that I think it's also true that there's something about marriage of emotional security that suggests something really profound. I mean, look, if we were just physical creatures like the secularists say, if there wasn't anything spiritual or metaphysical about us at all, then it wouldn't make any sense that marital security would bring a higher level of satisfaction. I mean, the physical act would be the physical act, and that would be it. But the fact that there's a level of security and care there, and a commitment. You're not on a perpetual job interview, so to speak, like you would be in a cohabiting relationship. You've got the job, like the security is there. Right. That actually brings the level of pleasure up as well. And I think that suggests not only that, if you want to have really good relationships, both maritally and physically, well, then good news, go to church and get married. But I think it also suggests that the Christian understanding of the human person is right. There's more to us than just our bodies.
Yeah, well, I think that's right, John. And you said something that I think is really profound, and that is that it's a false dichotomy to say that boundaries restrict freedom. Boundaries, in fact, in many ways can increase freedom. Sex within the boundaries of a monogamous marriage gives you freedom from guilt, gives you freedom from shame. And there's a tremendous amount of freedom that can only be experienced within boundaries. And I think that is one of the profound insights of this particular study.
Yeah, it's fantastic. David French was talking about it. I loved what he said. And this is something that we're seeing more and more and more, that the promises of the sexual revolution have turned out to be false promises, that the bad ideas of the sexual revolution have victims. And he put it this way: sexual liberation apparently brings neither sex nor liberation. In other words, it doesn't bring the freedom, and it actually doesn't bring the pleasure that has been promised, as long as we find ways, medically and socially and morally to divorce sex from any sort of context like marriage and any sort of consequence like children. Yeah, it's just a fascinating thing. But it also says this. We often say, again, ideas have consequences, bad ideas have victims. But the converse is that is true too, which is good ideas, those ideas that do actually correspond to reality, they have benefits, real life benefits, sometimes benefits you may not want to miss out on. That was pretty good. We got around the awkwardness there pretty well, didn't we?
I'm not sure, maybe.
We'll see how many emails we get on the backside. Well, you've been listening to Breakpoint this week. It's been fun to talk about these things. Come to breakpoint.org. Click on the link on the homepage that says resources mentioned on the radio and podcast, and we'll link you to our Breakpoint from this past week entitled "The Bedroom and the Pew: Religious Couples Are the Most Satisfied." This is something you should share with the young couples in your life. You should share them, I think, as you continue to walk your children through the challenges of understanding and living in chastity. They need to not only know why they shouldn't partake of certain activities outside of marriage, but why marriage itself brings so much good. And that really speaks to the level of the created design that is marriage and the relationships that accompany marriage. Again, come to breakpoint.org. And don't forget, while you're there, sign up for our next short course. It's called The Gods of Our Age. Yes, we have idols in the 21st century as well, and the 4 idols and their consequences that we're going to look at include the idols of sex, the idols of the state, the idols of science, and the idol of stuff, materialism. And we'll talk about all those in the next 4 Tuesday nights. Each session is about an hour and a half long. Includes a presentation and an opportunity to interact online live with the instructor. We got a great lineup, Warren, of instructors for this short course, don't we?
Well, we sure do. Hunter Baker with Union University, Jennifer Roback Morris, J.P. Moreland, one of my favorites, and, of course, you, John Stone Street.
Well, 3 out of 4 ain't bad. Come to breakpoint.org and you can sign up for this short course. For Warren Smith, I'm John Stone Street. Thanks for joining us this week and each and every week as we talk about what's happening in the culture from a Christian worldview. Remember, ideas have consequences. Bad ideas have victims. For Warren Smith, I'm John Stone Street. We'll see you next time.